Chapter 1, The Last Train. The midnight air was thick with mist as Thomas Garrett stepped off the train, the rhythmic clanking of the wheels fading into the distance. The station, a forgotten relic from a time long past, was desolate. A single flickering lantern hung from the awning, casting long, trembling shadows that danced like ghosts on the cracked cobblestone platform. A breeze stirred the papers scattered about, but no sound echoed except the faint drip of water from a leaking roof. The town of Windridge was a place few visited, and few were left. It lay hidden in the folds of the countryside, off the beaten path, far from the bright lights and noise of modern life. Thomas had never intended to arrive here. His destination was another town, another life, but when the train had stopped unexpectedly at this godforsaken station, it had seemed easier to get off than stay on. A mistake, he would later realize, but one that would haunt him. As the train's distant whistle echoed through the night, Thomas turned to see a tall figure standing at the edge of the platform. The man wore a dark coat and a wide-brimmed hat that obscured his face, save for his eyes, wide, pale, and gleaming in the dim light. The man did not speak, nor did he move, but his presence felt oppressive, as if the very air had thickened with some unspeakable weight. Thomas glanced around, unease creeping into his chest. There were no taxis, no buses. Nothing but the stillness. "Where am I?" he asked, his voice breaking the silence. The man's lips parted, but his voice came out not in words, but in a low, rasping sound, like the wind whispering through a crack in a door. "Follow the lantern." The words were strange, cryptic, and yet they struck something deep within Thomas, a pull he could not explain, a compulsion he could not resist. He glanced toward the street and saw the soft glow of another lantern further down the road. Without thinking, he began to walk. Chapter 2, The Lantern's Path. The street was empty, unnaturally so. The buildings on either side were dark, their windows like hollow eyes, staring down on him with a malevolent gaze. He could feel the weight of the town pressing in around him, as if it was aware of his presence, watching, waiting. The lantern ahead of him swayed gently, its light flickering like a heartbeat. He could not explain why, but he had to follow it. The night air was growing colder, and the mist seemed to cling to his skin, creeping under his coat and into his bones. He quickened his pace, but the lantern remained just out of reach, its light teasing him, drawing him deeper into the heart of the town. As he walked, he noticed that the streets were strangely familiar. He had never been here before, yet the layout, the buildings, the very air felt like a forgotten memory, a dream half remembered. His thoughts were interrupted by the distant sound of footsteps behind him. He stopped, heart pounding, and turned. No one was there. The streets remained as empty as they had been moments before. Yet the feeling of being watched, of being followed, lingered like a shadow. He resumed walking, more cautiously now, but the lantern ahead of him was still there, just a few steps further. He could almost feel its warmth, could almost see the shape of the person holding it, but no one appeared in the dark streets. Then he saw it, an alley to his left, a narrow passageway between two buildings. At the end of the alley stood another lantern, its light softer, almost welcoming. Something in him urged him to enter, to follow the path deeper into the heart of Windridge. The moment he stepped into the alley, the world seemed to change. The mist grew thicker, swirling around his ankles like tendrils, and the buildings on either side twisted, their facades warping into grotesque shapes. The ground beneath him became soft and uneven, as if the cobblestones had melted into the earth. The lantern at the end of the alley flickered violently, and in that moment, he saw a figure standing beneath it. The figure was tall, its features obscured by the hood of a cloak. But it was the eyes, those pale, gleaming eyes, that drew him in. They were fixed on him, cold and empty, like the gaze of something that had long since lost its soul. "You shouldn't have come," the figure rasped, its voice like the creak of an ancient door. Chapter 3, The Watchers. Thomas froze, his heart hammering in his chest. The alleyway stretched endlessly ahead, but the figure was unmoving, its gaze unwavering. For a moment, Thomas considered turning back, fleeing into the night, but something held him there, something more powerful than fear. The lantern's light pulsed, drawing him closer. The figure spoke again, its voice softer this time, almost a whisper. "You've seen them, haven't you? The Watchers. The ones who never leave." Thomas felt a chill grip his spine. He had seen them. In the corners of his vision, fleeting shadows that moved just beyond his reach. The eyes that watched him from the windows. The eyes of the town itself, waiting. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice unsteady. The figure tilted its head, as if considering him. "I am one of them," it said. "But not the one you should fear. No, that one is waiting for you." The lantern flickered, casting long shadows across the alley. Thomas tried to speak, to ask who the figure meant, but his words caught in his throat, suffocated by a growing sense of dread. The air around him grew thick, and his breath came in ragged gasps. He tried to back away, but his legs betrayed him, locking in place. The figure stepped forward, and as it did, the ground beneath Thomas's feet began to shift, turning to soft earth, then to mud. He tried to scream, but no sound came out. The figure's hand stretched toward him, its long fingers curling as if to claim him. "You're the one they have been waiting for," the figure murmured. "The Laterns Call has found you." Chapter 4, The Heart of Windridge. Thomas could no longer fight the pull of the figure. He felt himself drawn forward, his legs moving against his will, his body trembling with the weight of some unspoken doom. The figure led him deeper into the town, past twisting streets that seemed to fold in on themselves, past windows that showed nothing but darkness. They came to a square, an open area surrounded by dilapidated buildings. At the center stood an ancient stone well, its surface slick with algae. The lantern's light illuminated it, casting long shadows across the stones. And in the well, something stirred. Thomas felt a strange compulsion to approach. His hand shook, his mind screaming for him to stop, but his feet carried him forward, one step at a time, until he was standing at the edge of the well. The air grew thick, oppressive, and he could hear faint whispers rising from the depths. The voice of 1,000 lost souls, each one calling his name. As he leaned closer to the well, a hand, cold and clammy, shot out from the darkness, gripping his wrist. He gasped, struggling to break free, but the hand tightened, dragging him closer to the edge. "Don't look," the figure hissed, but it was too late. Thomas's gaze fell into the depths, and what he saw made his blood run cold. There, in the blackness of the well, were eyes, countless eyes, watching him. Some were human, some were not. All of them were empty, hollow, their gazes filled with a hunger that was ancient and cruel. And in the center of them all, a face emerged, half human, half shrouded in shadow, its mouth twisted in a grin that spoke of madness. "You've come to join us," it said, its voice both familiar and alien. "The Laterns Call has claimed you, just as it claimed all before you." Chapter 5, The Lanterns Toll. The hand that gripped Thomas's wrist pulled harder, and his body was jerked toward the well's edge. He could feel the pull, the magnetic force of whatever lay below, its darkness eager to swallow him whole. The figure stood motionless behind him, its eyes never leaving Thomas's face. "It's too late. The town is already yours. Windridge claims all who hear the call." In a desperate attempt to break free, Thomas struggled, his pulse racing. But it was as if the world around him had grown solid, his limbs encased in invisible chains. He could not move, could not scream. All he could do was look down into the abyss of the well, where the eyes stared back, unblinking, and the voice grew louder, louder, calling him. The darkness began to swallow him, pulling him downward. His breath caught in his throat, and his vision blurred. In that final, fleeting moment, as the cold of the well's depths engulfed him, he understood. Windridge had never been empty. The lanterns, the whispers, the watchers, they were not of this world. And now, as the darkness consumed him, he would become one of them. The Laterns Call had claimed him, as it had claimed all those before him. And the town of Windridge, forever hungry, forever waiting, would never let him go. The lantern flickered one last time. And then, there was silence.